Welcome back. All right, thank you for the warm welcome. We have one last session for you, and I know you're set to leave this great AFS Global Conference, but we need to get to action. We need to leave this conference and start working on those great ideas and connections. And I know you're already excited to listen to our amazing speakers who are lined up for our closing session. But before we get to that, I do want another round of applause for everyone that has presented in our parallel sessions, idea dates, panels. Give yourself a big round of applause. I heard wonderful things. I heard wonderful comments from people coming out of the rooms, and to be honest, I felt a little, left out, because I did not get to be in any of those sessions. So please share, go on Twitter, go on social media, go on your blogs and post about your experiences, post about what you have learned, because there are a lot more people like me who did not get to be in those interesting conversations. All right, without further to say, it is my pleasure to introduce to you a true educator and then AFS legend, and I think a person that really deserves that indication. Please welcome on the stage Dr. Roberto Rufino, Secretary General of the Fondazione Intercultura.
That is really embarrassing. It's really embarrassing. I don't know how I ended up on this stage. I basically think of myself as being an AFS returnee. I was a participant in the AFS exchanges exactly 60 years ago. So now you know my age. Anyway, I think that what happened with me is that I never fully digested my AFS year. And from when I came back, I started sort of pondering and reflecting on what that year was and what it meant and what kind of difference it made in my life. And in general, what kind of difference it makes to lives of people who leave their home for a long period of time at a very young age, go to another country, come back and continue their life in their home country. And all of the interest that I've had in education in the course of my life, I think really originates from that experience. And now that I'm towards the end of my life, I look back and I'm very happy, and I consider myself to have been very fortunate to have gone through that. Anyway, apart from personal recollections, I think that most people sitting in this room are familiar with the report that Jacques Delors presented to UNESCO on the future of education in 1995. It was really a turning point in the pedagogical studies. And as you may remember, he was pointing to 4 pillars for the future of education, things that people should learn in their education process. And first of all, they should learn to learn, they should learn to do, they should learn to be, and they should learn how to live together. We have often made reference to this sentence, learning to live together, both in the course of this week, but also in the course of AFS in this case, since I belong to AFS. In recent years, we had a whole session on this topic at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris 4 years ago. And this has been a recurring thought. And it's very interesting because it's a recurring thought that is not so different from what AFS was saying when I went on the program 60 years ago. On my AFS leaflet of 60 years ago, there was a sentence that said, "Walk together, talk together, ye old people of the earth, for then and only then shall you have peace, which happens to be a Sanskrit proverb. So this idea that people in the world have to learn how to work together. And of course, that sentence was utilized by AFS in the aftermath of World War II. So under the pressure of the disaster that had been the 6 years of war and the need of working together in order to build peace. And this is the other concept that has been so intertwined with international education. International education for what? International education to build peace, to build a peaceful society. And I can recall in the course of my AFS history how much we were influenced by people involved in peace education across the decades. We actively participated in activities with Johan Galtung in Sweden and in Norway in the 70s, and were strongly influenced by his concepts of conflict resolution, as well as other things around the world. I can think of the work of Elder Câmara in Brazil. I can think of Ivan Illich. I can think of Rabindranath Tagore in India, and I could name many others. This idea that people have to be educated to peace through dialogue, confrontation and dialogue, which is at the core, the roots of what we are discussing also in the course of this week. This idea has been revitalized, as I said, by Jacques Delors in his report to the UNESCO, and has caught fire much more in the last decade with all kinds of initiatives. I remember Jan Figel, since we are in this country, who was at the time European Commissioner for Education, coming to one of our meetings and saying, what you are doing, exchanging people with the other countries, should not be an option. It should be a must for educational systems across the world. And it's very touching for me to see that now the European Commission, and I apologize for quoting European Commission in a world context, but we are in Europe now, the European Commission is now investigating how to build a new space for education in Europe. And one of the items in this project is not only to recognize each other's diplomas and all the other bureaucratic things that go with it, but it's really the idea that exchanges should be at the core of education in the future. And I say, not only for pupils, I would urge this to become a must for teachers, because only if schools opens up to this idea through the people who run the schools, we are hopefully getting somewhere. And it's not only, of course, the European Commission, it's UNESCO again has repeatedly touched upon the topic of intercultural and global education. We have had presentations from OECD. We have been informed by what the Council of Europe is doing for education to democracy through, again, a global competence approach. So all this seems to be all over the place today. And yet, we're not there, because we see that what is prevailing in the world, in Europe for sure, is global incompetence and not competence. And so there's this struggle going on between the vision that many of us have for the future and the reality of narrow-mindedness that seems to be prevailing in our part of the world and elsewhere as well. And today the topic is exactly this. Today we want to close these roundtables on global competence, reflecting on the barriers, the hurdles that we still have on our way. We would like to reflect on how we can align those naysayers, the people who are hesitant, who are never ready to jump on our side, how we can convince critics, how can we convince opponents, how can we bring together more people from different walks of life, and not only within the education system, but in general in our societies. And in order to do this, we have invited 4 testimonials who will tell us something about the experiences that they have had, and I invite them to come on stage at this point. Thank you all and welcome. I will not try to introduce each of you because you all have interesting jobs and you come from very interesting organizations. So I would invite each of you to go in a first round of presentations where very shortly you say who you are, where you come from, and what you do in life, and how you are connected to the topic that we're discussing today. And maybe we can start with Regina. Would you be the first one?
So, hello, my name is Regina Honu, and I'm from Accra, Ghana. So, fixing what I do in the conversation of global competence is, as you are aware, in order to navigate an interconnected world, you need digital skills. And as a software developer and a believer in critical thinking and problem solving, the work that I do is preparing the next generation, and even the generation we have today, with digital skills, the ability to create software, coding, and also soft skills such as empathy, entrepreneurship, leadership, in order to be locally relevant but globally competitive. So I do this work with children, adults, a particular focus on women, and also minority groups like the disabled and autistic. And one thing that we're also trying to do is, we're trying to do last mile access. So really connect the unconnected and bring everybody into the conversation. Because as you can imagine, in some places in Africa, you don't have much connection. So we are missing out on those voices. And for me, every voice is important. So it's also ensuring that we go to the deepest and darkest corners, to get people with digital skills and to get them connected. And finally, I just wanted to add that I am an example of, how digital can help you expand your global brand, because I use technology to amplify my voice, and that has helped me to catapult from just working in Ghana to being able to be represented in global conversations across the world. So having digital skills is essential, and that's why I'm passionate about the work that I do.
Well, thank you. Wendell, do you want to be second?
Great, thank you. I'm Matthew Lawrence, and I'm Executive Director of the Coexistence work at the Tony Blair Institute of Global Change. We're based in London, but we very much work internationally. We have a range of programs and research work, but perhaps today focus on our Generation Global program, which equips educators around the world to enable their young people to successfully navigate difference through dialogue. We've worked with around 12,000 educators, training them and equipping them with the skill set to enable their young people with the skills of critical thinking and dialogue. And then we facilitate virtual exchange experiences for those young people so they can connect with their peers wherever they might be. We work in over 40 countries. We have a particular focus on about 11 where we have staff on the ground. It's a program we've very much built bottom up over the last 10 years to have worked with over 340,000 students. We now work with about 70,000 students a year internationally, although this year, this summer and last summer, we also worked with tens of thousands of more students in Jordan. And I think one of these things of overcoming the challenges is how do we make this work that's often very much built bottom up to work top down. So how do we engage with governments and build that traction so they really realize the importance of equipping young people with this skill set when there are so many demands on education systems and educators internationally. That's on the global level. Locally, we have a new program just a couple of years old that we're really just piloting called Compass, but that really seeks to overcome some of the challenges that just locally you experience with difference. So we're working with mentors from corporates across London to go into schools to work with young women and we're also working with some university partners as well to ensure that those young women can get proper access through exploring. Part of that is through exploring their identity and using some of the skill sets that we teach through Generation Global to gain access to higher education and the workplace. So I think the really important thing, one of the things very important for organizations such as ours and many of those represented here, is how can we transfer some of those big ideas that work kind of globally into kind of much poorer and marginalized communities, and where can we find the access to do that? Thank you.
Right. And do you support, when you say you support, you help them through scholarship, in which way you do it?
So we work with the schools to give the skill set to build that knowledge around the opportunities that they're aware of. Interestingly, the great traction that we've begun to build with corporates there, some of those corporates are beginning to think, how can they actually very then practically give the participants of that program opportunities within their organizations through internships or scholarships and the like. So it's an exciting program that we've just started piloting, very specifically in London, but we think potentially adaptable to many contexts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gabby, you want to be next?
Thank you. My name is Gabrielle Mandel, and I'm with CISV International, and thank you very much for having us here today. I'm delighted to be able to introduce some of you to CISV and hopefully reacquaint some of you with CISV. Our role is really in the non-formal education side of things, and simply stated, our mission statement is to educate and inspire action for a more just and peaceful world. So how do we do that? We do that by offering experiences in communal living and learning for young people from around the world. We bring them together to have the chance to get to know each other, to identify similarities, to also appreciate differences and break down the barriers between them. CISV has a very similar sort of founding origin to AFS YFU. Our founder was an American psychologist, and in the wake of the Second World War, she looked at her professional knowledge, she looked at her young son and thought, we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure this never happens again. And she looked around at all the work that was being done by the UN, bringing leaders together, and she thought, well, that's essential and important, but if we really want to build understanding and work for peace long term, we need to start much earlier. We need to start with the children. And she developed her model for bringing 11-year-olds together at an age where they were still open, but old enough to maybe leave their homes, maybe their parents were willing to send them away at that time, and bring them together for an incredibly powerful experience with kids, their peers from other countries. So at the end of their time together, other countries weren't just abstract places on maps. No, I have a friend there. I can empathize with something that happens in that country. So today, we've gone from our very first camp, which was called a village in Cincinnati in 1951, to close to 300 international programs every year. We're in approximately 70 countries, and we involve about 10,000 participants in our international programs and 5,000 locally each year now. And all of this is organized almost entirely by volunteers in our 200-odd local chapters, and they are supported by a handful of staff, including my small dedicated team in Newcastle in the northeast of England, where you are all welcome to come and discuss things with us. We really believe very strongly that though the realities of the world today are not the same as those at the time of our founding, the mission is as relevant and as critical and as necessary today as it was then.
I think your model is very interesting because in some way it's complementary for different reasons for the model of AFS. But you, I remember, I'm old enough to have met the founder of your organization. Not in 1948, I want to underline
She lived to almost 101, I think so. There was
But
a lot of space
it's
there.
interesting because this idea that you bring people together before the age of rationalization, when they're still mostly an emotional human being that can make friends before reflecting whether he is another color, comes from another country, speaks. I find it very different, which is somewhat complementary to the model of AFS of bringing people at the age of 16, 17, when they have started to realize the differences and work on that. Yeah, interesting.
And I think it's also that at that age, you're less inhibited, you're more open to nonverbal communication.
Exactly.
It's easier to make friends and break down the fear of other.
Exactly.
We're trying to...
May we go on to Ron, who has a very different story to tell us. Very interesting.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here. My name is Ron Davis Alvarez, and I was born in Venezuela, in Caracas. And I grew up in a program. It's called El Sistema. It's a program that uses music for tool for social integration and development. It was created 43 years ago by Maestro José Antonio Abreu, who was economist and musician. And I started to be an assistant teacher when I was 14. And the 16, when I get 16 years old, I have the first opportunity to be a conductor. Through that, I start to study at the university and a training teacher program, and I have a big opportunity to start to travel around the world as a guest teachers and in short and long and living in different countries, more than 20 countries. And one of the most amazing countries that I have opportunity to work and develop program, it was in north of Greenland, in Umanak. In a children's home, I was working with Inuit community and still working with them. They are kind of part of my family. And developing an orchestra with Inuit community. And now I'm artistic director of a foundation, the Sistema Sweden Foundation. We also work with social integration. And I founded 2 years ago an association, organization is called Dream Orchestra, who work with unaccompanied kids who came to Sweden. From Syria and from Afghanistan. So we create an orchestra. This orchestra have more than 15 languages from 5 years until 21. And through digital tools and visiting and also teaching in different refugees camps, they are leading program for young leaders. I do training by WhatsApp and by Skype in a refugees camp of Palestinians in Lebanon, and I have a program also supporting in Kenya, in Juja, and also in a refugees camp in Greece. And through that, I get a big opportunity to be recognized by a Global Teacher Prize. And the Global Teacher Prize is a big competition about teachers. Want to recognize teachers, but also give support and give voice empowerment to teachers and make unique teachers around the world also to have the opportunity to share in different subjects. I didn't win. It was $1 million. I'm very pity, but I win. Some very important thing, and it was connections and a lot of people who have the same vision. So the work that I do is mostly with vulnerability and also refugees, and using music as a tool for social development and belief in self.
Thank you, Ron. I'd like to take a second round of interventions on your side, because as I was saying before in my short presentation, all this is nice and dandy and we all like this, but it's so difficult to make it happen. So I would like you to speculate a little bit on the difficulties of different kinds. I mean, I can think of financial difficulties, I can think of bureaucratic difficulties from governments, from public institutions. I can think also of mentality difficulties, because sometimes they're more hidden, but they're the worst to have to fight off. So maybe we follow a different order. This time we start with Matthew and go the other way. In your approach, what are the most difficult things that you have to overcome?
It's kind of an easy question because there are so many. It's just kind of which ones to pick, sadly. Look, I think just positively, we have seen an increasing recognition. You know, many of you here have been working in this field for longer than I have, but people are starting to get this, and that is really the need of all of us to continue to make the case, and it is making that case that's hard work, but in every opportunity we have and wherever we can do it, let's continue to do that, because this is what we believe in. Financial, I promised Sylvia I'd talk about financial difficulties. You know, we have to continue to raise the money to do this. Part of that's very much linked to making the case. Ultimately, if we're really going to see the sort of systemic change that embedding this sort of practice in education systems and in our kind of human system is needed, we need governments to come alongside, recognize the importance of this in education systems. As I said, we've very much started our program kind of bottom up. We're increasingly working top down with governments, so driving that access, but it is challenging. We'll work with the ministry for several years. There'll be a change of government, a different minister will have different priorities, and all that network you've potentially built is swept away and you have to start again. That's slightly better than starting, you know, just with 1 or 2 schools each year. But it's, I think we're beginning to see, and actually research has shown that there's a real need to change the culture. Not just, you can't do this class by class, you need to do it in the school system. You need to change the whole environment in which young people work to get the maximum benefit for our sort of work. So again, making that case, having advocates that continue to show, and that our responsibility in that is monitoring and evaluation. And we invest significantly in that. We need to persuade funders. Often that's very expensive. So persuading funders, working with university partners and other partners to really demonstrate the benefits of these kind of skill sets, I think is crucial. Obviously, the OECD PISA, and Dala and I were talking about that at lunchtime, you know, is an important step towards that, and the evidence base that will begin to show. I think there are lots of very interesting research questions. For example, you know, can we demonstrate that having these skill sets will drive better academic performance? I think that's the kind of golden, because once we can prove that these kind of interactions kind of develop in that regard as well, that will start to ring with those governments, etc., that we want to work with. And at times it's a battle of ideas as well, as you say. There are people that are, and our earlier panel reminded us of that, you know, globalization is not something that's seen as a universal positive, interaction, etc. So
also because you're working with religion many times, religious differences, which is a very touchy thing, you know. Never mention religion in intercultural relations, please. Okay. Gabby, what do you do?
Sure. Most likely the challenges that we face at CISV are shared very much by AFS, and we're operating internationally across borders, time zones, different legal structures. We have the honor and privilege to have the care and responsibility of people's children and to make sure that they have a powerful and positive educational experience. And funding is an issue. We want to keep things accessible, but we also have to cover costs. I could go on and on and on about the challenges, and then of course in our case we are relying on an amazingly dedicated volunteer workforce that is trying to balance their work commitments, their life commitments, and doing all of this as volunteers. So there are many, many challenges. I think you want us to go into how we're overcoming some of them as well, right? So some of the ways that we are overcoming these in CISV currently is, well, the first thing I'll say is on a general scale, because times have changed and while the mission remains critical, the way we maybe need to approach it is different. So we have just embarked on a significant program review, looking at all of our 7 different programs that have evolved over the 70 years since our founding, to look at what makes most sense now, what is really on point in terms of our mission, and what is also susceptible to being scaled up more so that we can reach more people. And we're clarifying our if you want to call it theory of change, so that we can really make sure that we are true to ourselves and able to scale up more. We are looking at quality issues because we're operating across the world and we're trying to create some level of consistency in order to increase access and the consistency and the quality of our training. We're developing e-learning modules to make a more blended learning approach to that and get more people able to be onboarded through e-learning. We are engaging in some really interesting partnerships, like the one with AFS that Caro announced today. Our partner Momondo is ably represented by Alan, whom some of you may have heard earlier today, working with schools, developing our types of activities to go into schools. And the biggest initiative, I guess, that we have launched internally this year is something I think would be very relevant for the likes of AFS, is that we've just launched our Alumni Association. So why do you launch an Alumni Association? Because you know that your alumni represents the best place to go for support, for ambassadors, for connections, for the people who can really raise your profile and make sure that they're representing you. They are proof positive that our kind of
do you get big
works.
visibility? Is it difficult to get acknowledged by media, or do you get your word around easily? Or
This is a very good question. So let me ask you the question. How many of you had heard of CISV before coming here? It's hard to see, but I'm not seeing a lot of hands up. Oh, thank you. Okay, so a few, but even though we work in the same sector, I think that answers your question. That's one of our challenges. Alan is helping a lot on that. We've had quite a lot of views on an amazing video that we did with them in partnership, but largely CISV, as I'm sure AFS does, relies on a lot of word of mouth.
Yeah. Regina, what are your troubles?
So I'm just gonna start off with, so just even a personal challenge. So I started the organization in 2012, and to date we've trained like 5,500 people in Accra and Burkina Faso. My first challenge is being a female in the technology space, right? So that's challenge number one. I constantly have to bring my chair to join the table, you know. Challenge number two is mindset. So you have many people that don't understand that digital is now. Some people think, you know, we still have some time to go. Some people think, you know, our educational system already has so many different challenges that digital is not as important of a priority now, which I totally disagree with, because that can help us bridge all the gaps in our education system and give a more practical, you know, way of learning. So what we're doing is we're piloting teaching coding in all public schools, and we've started with one school to convince our government to see the value that it has today. Another challenge is also changing stereotypes, right? And I say this because right now there are lots of young people in Africa doing amazing things, but we still have the challenge of the single story, right? Where people think the continent is full of, you know, crime, war, all the negative stuff. I mean, every country has its share of negative things, but then we don't attract as much opportunities as across the world, because everybody is still thinking of that single negative story. So one thing that we're also trying to do is change that. If we're going to work in an interconnected world, we must understand that there are amazing people everywhere doing amazing things, and we don't have to let that stereotype restrict that exchange. So we have Skype calls with children from different schools, just so that they know that people on the continent are also doing amazing stuff, and we don't have to be left out. And I think the final challenge that we have is sustaining and scaling innovation, right? So it isn't as easy when you start a bright light to grow, but so that is where you need partnerships. So partnerships is very important. So partnering with different agencies, be it the government, be it private stakeholders, be it academia, to make sure that you're able to scale innovation and sustain it.
Yeah. Well, good luck. Good luck. Thank you, Regina. Ron?
What the challenge that I always see in the programs that I'm teaching is actually coming for the immigrations politics. Mostly, every time they teach students, many of them even don't have permission to stay in that place, or they are waiting to know where they go to live. So that's why I think the education is right now most important than ever, because we have our students who are going to be the new politicians. So we need to give them an opportunity to feel intercultural and global perspective that we can be together. We don't need to be separated. And this is one of the bigger challenges. Another important challenge is to replace the traumatized or difficult of the students when coming and say the music is an important subject. Our art is an important subject. We have been talking, and I've been hearing a lot in the conference about the soft skill or power skill, as I also agree with that, are very important in the curriculums at school, but also is necessary that people see music, see art, sport as a very important subject to involve the students, kids, and youth people. And the third challenge that I must say is always fundraising. It's always difficult to convince people to do good things. Can you imagine that? I don't understand how it's possible that every time you need to convince people to good things is so hard. And I must say the most difficult is to keep that energy to the end of trying and trying, and logistical challenge as well. I'm so happy the technology is developing much and much better, because then I teach in so many different places, so it made me easy. But I must say that also take a plane almost every week or every 2 weeks is a challenge.
Tell them, it's an incredible. He has classes sort of on a weekly basis in Sweden, Lebanon, and Cyprus, which are not exactly neighboring countries.
I have to travel very much all the time, and that's going to be a challenge, because sometimes you are teaching of technology in a music aspect. I need to be there. I need to inspire the kids, and I need to be inspiring these new educators. So that's, I think, is that challenge.
You touch also on a very important point that anybody involved in educational activities internationally is aware of, that while governments say that, international education is good, that we have to open up the schools and so on, they make it almost impossible to travel. and especially for minors, sometimes getting a visa for a minor to go from one country to another becomes a nightmare. And this is indeed...
I need so many visas all the time.
Yeah. But especially, of course, in your case, you're dealing with refugees, so it's even more difficult. But even when you are dealing with citizens of a country who have a regular passport and everything, getting a visa sometimes takes forever, and the rules change every year, and you never know whether the next year you're going to get the visa from the same country or not. It's quite something. Well, why don't we turn on the lights a little bit and use a few minutes to ask questions from the floor to our presenters. Is there anyone who would like to put a question or make a comment on what we heard from our presenters this afternoon? Oh. You're either very shy or very sleepy, one of the two.
There's a question there, sir.
Being after lunch, it's understandable.
Roberto?
It's a question.
Go ahead, please.
Nagesh Rao. I'm from College of Osteopathic Medicine in the US. I think two things, and I know for years we've been talking about the need to live together. I wonder, and in this context today, I think, yes, even that goal is important. But I wonder if we should probably talk about the need to thrive together. Of course we live, but if we don't thrive together, it doesn't do much for us. The other question I have is, and this is with the panel overall, is looking at challenges is absolutely important, but I also know some research that says that when you use only a problem-solving approach, over time, with funds being an issue, programs tend to have challenges too. And I wonder if we could focus, if you will, or flip it, and look at programs that succeed in the midst of all the challenges that we have. And probably many of you are familiar with the area of positive deviance. And positive deviance work is really saying, why don't we take the lessons from people who are doing well, and sometimes it's only 2 or 3% maybe in the programs from all over the world, and use those as a starting point in terms of movement towards change.
Thank you. Who would like to respond to it, please? Matthew?
It's a terrific question, thank you. Firstly, on the thriving, I completely agree. It's incredibly important. One of the reasons why we started Compass was really to begin to address equality, and increasingly at the Institute, both in our research and our programmatic work, we're thinking about those aspects of where does diversity and equality intersect, and how do we address some of those structural factors that stop people from thriving, and often they're the same factors that stop people from integrating. So really thinking that through. It's very important to learn from success as well. I think one of the hard things, though, is defining what does success mean. I mean, we look at some very practical measures like how much things cost to develop. Some things are very expensive, though, but very successful, so we can't just look at it like that. There's some stuff that we do that I kind of slightly wince at the cost of getting it over the line every year. But they are incredibly important interactions. Some of those things I even a little uneasier talking about publicly in this side of space, but they are incredibly important interactions. Equally, I am perpetually humbled by the amazing interactions we have in incredibly hard to work in environments. We work in Quetta, for example, in Pakistan, where our local coordinator drives around with a generator and a laptop to schools that have no electricity, that have no online capability, and a Wi-Fi dongle, and he connects those students with their peers internationally, and they are mind-boggling interactions. Similarly, we had many of our schools, I'm sure like many of your programs at times, are quite privileged schools. They're schools that understand this, they're schools that need this. But it is phenomenal when we fold schools into the program, we welcome schools into the program who don't have those advantages. The reports we get back from the teachers about how those students were kind of really brought alive by that. We worry at times that they'll struggle with those interactions, see much more privileged students elsewhere, but we often see the opposite of the case. So I make it a regular priority to talk to our teachers, to talk to our students, and really hear those amazing stories, and then we really think through how can we amplify those, how can we make the program more successful by learning from those great successes, not just constantly being a pessimist, which is also slightly my job as well, but I try not to be, so thank you.
I think that if we were pessimists, none of us would be sitting here. We are optimistic by definition. Any of you would like to add something?
I would like to say that I do agree that it's important, don't see some of the challenges, go forward to the things that you want to do, but I also think it's important that if you know your challenge around, even if you don't put the focus there, you work hard to make this working more, so you know what your weaknesses are, and so in that way you can have a more clear way of planification what you want to accomplish. And I think the secret for that, to keep the positive and is for me has been always attitude and also teamwork, because that is actually make these challenges a little soft. And I do agree that we as a teacher, and when I go to a class, I don't see in a class the challenge. The first things I see, how many future I have here. So that is what I see in the first round. And then after I see, okay, I have some challenge, they will work softly, but my focus is to make then all the students empowered.
Thank you. Any other comments? Someone on this side?
Hello everyone, I'm Renato Monar from CISV in Hungary, and I just want to say thank you for your inspiring words. It's really a pleasure to being here. I have many questions, but prioritizing, we are talking about education and learning, providing the students those experience to develop, but also it's an interesting part, what are those that we have to unlearn, not learn but unlearn in order to develop and succeed in life, and what is your opinion about that?
So when it comes to unlearning, there are so many things that you have to unlearn. One of the things that we discovered when we did a survey on what are employers looking for, and most employers were looking for soft skills, right? So critical thinking, passion, empathy, all of those things. So I think the first thing that you have to unlearn is learning doesn't always only happen in the classroom, right? I mean, it's just one vehicle, but learning happens all around you. So you have to create the appetite for knowledge, and you should be seeking it from different places. And thankfully, you know, we have technology that would allow you to learn things from different places without necessarily having to go to that place. So I think the first thing that people will have to unlearn is education is not just in the classrooms, it's happening all around you, and you should be open to that. And I just also wanted to add that it's essential that we share more success stories, because negative news always goes viral, for a technical term. So in order to get people to see more success, we also have to keep sharing more of the success stories, so that also becomes something that goes viral often. And I think finally, the last thing that we must unlearn is that young children have powerful contributions like we've learned now. I mean, we learn so many things from the kids in our program. I'm constantly like learning from them and blown away by the way they are thinking, how fast they're able to take information, what they're able to create, how they're able to problem solve. So the millennial generation is just an amazing one. So I think, as we've said, it's important that, you know, we give young people the platform so that we hear from them, because, I mean, they really have a lot of solutions that we need.
Well, you want to say something? I don't want you to add something, because what you said reminded me of a beautiful sentence by Saint-Exupéry, who says, if you want to build a ship, don't provide your people with nails and hammers and wood, but tell them about the beauty and the openness of the sea, so that they become keen in doing that. Yeah, sure. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I think this, we're all sort of on a theme here that, but, you know, as the song says, accentuate the positive. It gives you something to look forward to. So what we've done is to set ourselves a challenging, ambitious, but doable goal of doubling our reach by 2030. And on a personal and professional level, I find that very motivating. Focus on what we can do. Focus on what are the programs we can scale up. What are the opportunities? And one of the things that I think I've had to unlearn in my life, and that working with a lot of the volunteers in our organization, one of the things that we're working on unlearning is how we approach potential partners, potential participants, potential parents. Often people tell us, well, we don't really feel comfortable going out there and blowing our own horn or asking for money or telling people we're great. That's not comfortable for us. We have to unlearn that. We have to trumpet our successes. And I was just telling someone that I'm an adopted Geordie, as we call the people who live in Newcastle. And one of the expressions from there that I've picked up is that shy bairns get nowt, which means shy children get nothing. And we have to be able to put ourselves out there, open up, and engage with people, or else we will be well-kept secrets, wonderful secrets, but we don't want that.
Well, I thank you for being a very good panel. Thank you. Paul. I think we are now having a musical interlude, taking advantage of the fact that we have a musician with us. And so I thank you again. And we can move off stage, and there will be a second part after the music.
Before I play, I would like to say, think for 2 seconds about one song, one piece that reminds your childhood, something that makes you feel happy. If you didn't have one song that remind you when you were a child, well, choose one that you really like now who's made you happy, because I used to hear the music is universal language, but I always add the music is not the sound of an instrument, the sound of voice, not. It's the sound of our heartbeat. It's the sound of our soul. That's why we need to cultivate our soul with art, with music. And think about that, and I will want to share one that remind me my homeland, Venezuela. what right now is in a humanitarian crisis, but made me remember how powerful we are, how we can be dreaming, how we dream for things. And this song I will connect with another songs. And how is that possible? I will play Hungarian dance, connecting with a Venezuelan song, Middle East music, and East in the end. It's only that possible if you adapt. And I think that is the secret of connecting. Be adaptable, be open and flexible, to learn and listen. So I will do this, I thank you. The name of the song, where it starts, is Caballo Viejo from Simón Díaz. Thank you.
We're all very grateful to Ron for having taken us around the world with this short musical interlude. I would like to invite my friend and colleague from Holland, the chair of AFS Holland, Hanneke Teekens, to join me here. Do you prefer to sit right or left or here? Fine. Would you introduce yourself maybe, like the others have done?
Okay, thank you. Well, as you said, I'm Hanneke Teekens. I'm the chair of the board of AFS in the Netherlands. And I've been an educator in many ways, in schools, in universities, in institutions. But I've also been a bureaucrat because I ended up being on the board of directors of NUFIC. And NUFIC is an organization very much like DAAD and the British Council, facilitating education.
Okay, thank you. And I think that what we want to achieve in the next 10 minutes or so is to reflect a little bit on the things that we have heard. So both the pleasant, constructive side. I think there was a very positive approach regardless of problems that we may have. So what was your reaction to what you heard this afternoon?
Well, first of all, it's of course very, very difficult to reflect on such a very rich input, but I took about 7. I think that's always a number that people can remember, things that I would like to take away. And I think the first thing that was very good is when we're talking about obstacles, about what might be difficult, to expand this idea of global competence in a broader audience than the converted, is that we should celebrate success, that we should be proud of what we do, that we should also not be, how should I say, afraid of doing this. Because in my view, what is not just threatening our political systems, but also to some extent our educational systems, is that people are being afraid about what students perform. This morning we heard about the assessments. I mean, we seem to live in education in a way where we want to control children and want to control the outcome of their learning process. And I think that's the wrong way. I think we should celebrate the innovative kind of thinking that young people have. And so I was very happy to hear that that was one of the most important things that was mentioned. Believe in young children, believe in their vitality, believe in the way they can come up with new ideas, the way they can come up with solutions, in fact, that perhaps we old people don't think of. I think another thing that came through, but I think also in many of the other sessions, is that global competence is not just something that means learning for yourself. Global competence is learning for yourself, but being able to engage in a dialogue, to have others learn as well. And I think that's very important, and especially when we are thinking of the people, and that was mentioned also, it's very difficult. How can we actually reach the non-converted? Because that is what is the greatest threat. The people who say, oh, this is not important, this new nationalism, even populism. So how do we make others open up to dialogue? I think that's very important. And I think in learning, it is the American educationalist Marzano has said, you cannot learn unless you open up. You cannot learn unless you first emotionally want to learn. And I think that's the same with global competence as a learning process. You first must be willing to open up, but you also must be willing to let others open up before they could possibly learn. So, and that's also very nice, I think, that today you were saying culture is very nice and intercultural and global and all of that, but culture is learned. So let's not forget that people who have ideas that go or seem to go against peace on earth, let's put it very bluntly, have learned those ideas. So there is always the possibility for them to unlearn. And that is something that I also think relates to never being pessimistic when it comes to education, because you can learn, but you certainly can unlearn. It's a lot more difficult than learning. And what I also took away today is that educators have such an important role in this, but very often it's very difficult for them. And when they can learn more, and if schools would allow more teamwork among teachers and also team teaching rather than the lonely person in front of a classroom, it would be much better for teachers. And a real teacher is, of course, a learner. You can never be a good teacher unless you learn yourself. And that's what I liked, what was said, that I learn every day when Regina said, the young people give me this inspiration to learn myself. Well, and then, of course, for those with gray hairs, the whole digital thing is very new. So this is something that is new, not to the millennials, but it is very often new, or at least more difficult for the teachers than it is for the students. So I think all the ways in which you could combine digital learning and digital community and digital mobility within communities and among communities is a very and powerful instrument of education these days that is not really used to the fullest. And I think there also for organizations like AFS, there is much more possibility to engage in dialogue through reaching out to people who may not be actually mobile. But that also brings me to the situation of what really is mobility in this age where everybody is on their devices. So time and place are such a very different thing than they were in the past. So what does it really mean to be somewhere? While I was here in Budapest, I was in constant contact with my children, with my grandchildren, with my job, with everybody. I mean, they don't even know I am in Budapest. So what does location actually mean when we think about how we relate to other people? And why don't we use that much more than just, dealing with information? Why don't we use it much more in terms of shaping meaningful dialogue? And then I think another very important thing I took away from the wonderful conversation we just had is the word empowerment. Education is about empowerment, and also the link between the social and economic conditions by which children are able to go to school or not to go to school, to learn or not to learn. I think certainly also of girls in certain situations where they are disadvantaged compared to boys. I think it's very important to realize that you cannot really open up to learning unless you feel that it will empower you and that it will not just this knowledge and skills, but I think especially the mindset. Learning and unlearning mentality issues is very important. So I think empowerment is an extremely important element of global competence, because this is the resistance of certain groups and people when they think that engaging in this global dialogue is not going to empower them, it's not going to better their lives. Of course they're not going to do it. So where in the traits of knowledge, skills, and attitudes are sometimes at the end of the tail, I would put it in the front.
And I think that's the real issue, no? Impacting on attitudes. Because it's relatively easy to gain knowledge. It's a little more difficult, but it's relatively easy to get skills. But where the difficulty comes is really on changing attitudes, and that's why I was interested in hearing about the Children International Summer Villages, about the musical classes and so on, which are geared more at having an impact on the emotions, because that seems to be the forgotten end.
Yes.
And this is probably where computers, telephones, so on are not helping us very much. I remember we had the major international congress on this issue, which we call the body and the web. What is the difference between using the web and being there with your body? And the conclusions that came from a number of researchers around the world is that these machines, these innovations is good for bridging, but it's not good for bonding.
I fully agree, but in reality, I don't have the figures for the secondary schools, but I know that in spite of the increasing numbers, so people will say, oh, now we have 2 million international students, now we have 3, now we have 4, now we have 5, but they forget that that is numbers, but the actual percentage of mobile students hasn't changed. It's still worldwide around 2%, and for the younger kids, it's even much less.
Yes,
so I fully agree that sound and smell and you know, being there by yourself is extremely important, but it's just a small minority of us who are in that position.
This is, I think, is one of the challenges that we have ahead of us, you know, to how we can transfer what is being done today in a sort of fairly small laboratory in AFS and in other organizations to a larger scale. As I was referring to before in my initial words, it's not only a question of moving pupils, it's a question of moving teachers. I think it's absolutely important. I think that no one should teach in the 21st century if the person has not had some kind of exposure to another language, another country, has learned to see her or his own country from the outside, no matter from where, it doesn't make any matter, but from the outside, so that you don't have only one story, the national story about yourself, and you can actually transmit this sense of relativity to your classes, to your pupils, and hopefully grow another generation that will be more open to these kind of things. And about the unlearning, I think the most important thing to unlearn is the hatred that we have inherited from the past. It's greater in certain countries, it's smaller in other countries, but this is very hidden inside the people and comes up when you never expect it.
Yes.
You know, much of what is going on in Europe today has to do with the hatred from the past that re-emerges in different ways, with different names, but it's always there.
Yes, and it's always related to fear. And I think that's why it's very important when you say education is about empowerment, that people are also strong enough culturally to overcome the easy way to think about the other in terms of stereotypes. Because hatred is a collective thing. People usually don't hate each other unless they've had a very individual problem. But this collective hatred is very important. And that's what I think is important in what Matthew was mentioning, that this global competence is not just something in the schools and with individual children, but is also systematic on the political level, where politicians also must be educated to overcome this stereotype way of thinking about the others in terms of hating. But I fully agree with you that it's very difficult and that teachers play an important role. But I think it is also important to think about how to bring, because what is in the way was you know, the title of this session, that you need to do two things. You need to work bottom up in the schools, with the teachers, with the children, with the families, with the communities, but also top down on the political level, on the systematic level of education, yes, and other ways of social cohesion.
You may remember an interesting attempt that was made in this part of the world after the war to bring together historians of different European, yes, countries to try to find a common memory for Europe, because we, yes, don't have a common memory from Europe. And least of all, we have a common memory for the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that the kind of discussions that we're having here today will really not reach some kind of positive ending until we share common memories in the world. And we have conflicting memories, and these conflicting memories keep on re-emerging in our relations today. We are polite enough, we're educated enough that we don't throw them in the face of the people in front of us, but somewhere within ourselves they do play a role. And I think this emotional education is surely the most challenging part of the thing we're
I'm
discussing.
a historian, and I always feel that unless a country collectively has not reflected on its past and realized how it sort of goes through to the next generation, certain issues will not be solved. So I think that work, and Euroclio is still existing and is still doing a lot of work, not just in Europe, but also beyond, that this is one of the first steps you have to take in education to collectively overcome these ideas about the other. And it's not about crossing borders. I always feel that the most important border to cross is in your own head, at home.
Exactly. And another lesson that I got from the meeting today and from the previous sessions is that the future will be a better future. We find a way of cooperating non-governmental organizations with educational institutions in each country, which is something that is somewhat accepted at the international level. You know, when you talk to UNESCO, when you talk to the Council of Europe or whatever, it's absolutely normal that you have non-governmental organizations working along with ministries of education and official institutions. This is sometimes much more difficult at the national level, where there's some kind of jealousy from the national institution, the ministries of education, education belongs to us and you should stay out. If you want to do something in the summer, it's fine. But I think that looking for cooperation between civil society institutions and education institutions can bring us a long way in these directions, because we bring different knowledge, different skills, different attitudes. So this is exactly what we should be trying to do.
It's the schools and outside the schools. It's formal learning, it's informal learning, and that's extremely important,
And within this framework of cooperating, I think that, one of the schemes that is represented here, the schemes of educational exchanges, although it represents only 2%, I think a closing hope for our meeting here today that it goes up to 10, 20, whatever, because that it becomes an integral part of the educational system within the country.
I think it is extremely important to promote mobility, but to see that mobility in itself is not the solution, because mobility is not, in my view, an aim in itself, but a tool to make young people more globally competent, to have more understanding of the other, to start crossing borders in their head. So I think we have to work on mobility, but the numbers will only rise. But we will have to look at this impact. What is it really bringing about?
It's not only, as we were saying before, to look at the country from the outside, to get to know other countries, but it's also, I think what is the powerful thing about mobility is it puts you in a marginal situation. It puts you in a minority situation. You have been in the mainstream of your own country, you were like everybody else, you read the same books, you saw the same movie, and whatever, then all of a sudden, you are a nobody somewhere else. And the lesson of being a nobody somewhere else and having to find your way to become accepted in this society, I think this is a very powerful learning that stays with us. It gives you a certain degree of humbleness in front of differences, it gives you really a different understanding of yourself. And this is the attitude part, which is so difficult to achieve otherwise.
And that's extremely important. And I think from that perspective, in the context of AFS, I would also like to say why it's so important to be a host family. Because then you stay at home, but this otherness all of a sudden is in your home. And you all of a sudden have to wonder, why do we do the things we do? Because this new family member thinks this is a very strange way of doing it. And that's what I mean with mobility can also be a tremendous impetus for others who are not mobile to start to think at their own situation in a completely different way. So yes, mobility is very, very important, but I think it is also a great asset to our programs and our possibilities that we now have also a digital one. So I support the
Can we end on this positive note?
Yes,
that although there are lots of challenges, although we don't have money, although the mindset of people is reactionary, although governments get in the way, although we still have a positive conviction that working along these lines will bring us a long way. Thank you, Hanneke. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Roberto, and thank you, Hanneke, for summarizing what has been a thrilling experience for all of us. And thank you to our wonderful panelists once again for this engaging discussion. It's been 2.5 days, and we have gathered here to align priorities between different groups of stakeholders and to actually really create an urgent agenda for global competence education. I hope I am not wrong in saying that we got a good start. With this conference, we were able to make connections that will hopefully take us to the next stage. I have a couple questions for you. Have you been able to connect with others? All right. Has anyone been motivated to do better in their work? All right, getting there. Have you been challenged here? Even better. And I hope you have all been inspired. Great, wonderful. Well, that was our hope. We really hoped to gather you here to convert ideas and solutions into real actionable items that will take us further. We hoped that we can together create strategies that will put global competence education into the center of everyone's education all around the world, no matter how old they will be. It can be in a non-formal setting, it can be a formal setting, but global competence needs to be part of everyone's learning journey. We gathered here so we could turn our connections into meaningful partnerships. And we are looking forward to hearing about all those partnerships that will come out of this event. We hoped that you will connect with some experts here and then continue learning from them, that you will reach out to them after this event ends. And we hope that you will join us at AFS in advocating for making global competence a key part of education all around the world. I'm sure you will work on all aspects of this, but like we have done before, I do want to ask you, which one of these 5 things that I just mentioned will you do? You can choose 2 of them this time. Can we see the poll? All right, for those of you joined us a little later, the instructions will be visible on the right and left. If you just open your camera and point to the code, a link will pop up, and then you can choose 2 of these priorities. You can also go to the address if you're having trouble scanning the code. You can go to menti.com and enter the code 488155. You have 5 choices. You can choose up to 2. But as you choose, please make sure to think about things that you can really commit to doing. This is not a good to have. This is something that we really want you to commit to following up on. All right, I see 17 answers are already in there, and the rest are coming. Almost at 100. All right, we're past 100. I'll give you just a couple more seconds. I know this is taking longer than the ones before because you are really thinking about what you will really do. It looks like putting new ideas and solutions into action and developing new partnerships is going to be a key priority. But as you can see, all of these areas have a lot of people invested in them, and we hope that we will see results of this very soon. All right, we passed 155. Just so you know, some people have asked me, we will share results of all the polls with you along with some outcomes of this conference. As you can see, all of these priorities, regardless of which organization, which stakeholder group you come from, are meaningful for us to be able to really achieve positive results around global competence education. And as Daniel has shared, at AFS, we have a new strategy that commits us to these goals too. And we hope you will partner with us in doing this. We have heard some special announcements here about some key projects where we are partnering with some of the organizations represented here, and we hope that we can take that even further. At AFS, with our 60, actually more than 60 organizations around the world and 50,000 volunteers, some of which actually in this room, not many people know that all our board members here are also part of our volunteers, are committed to making this world a better place, and I'm committed to collaborating with you on different initiatives and different goals to make sure that we can really create a world that is globally competent, that is connected, and that is a more just and peaceful place, as it says in our mission. To do this, we do want to continue engaging with you, and we already have an invitation for you. Work hard and come back and join us in Montreal. We will be in Montreal in October 9 and 11, 2019. It's a beautiful city, as you will see, and we will discuss global citizenship in action, and we will try to set a new agenda for education. We hope you will all join us there for an event. This was our first global conference, by the way, for an event that will be better than this one, that will have more voices, that will have more organizations, that will have more young voices, that will have more students, and hopefully many more partnerships. We hope to see many of you in Montreal to continue working on the path that we have started here. Now, before I wrap up, I do need to say a few thank yous, and I do want to actually start with all of you. Please give yourselves a big round of applause for inspiring and sharing with each other. AFS Hungary has been our gracious hosts, and I think they have shown the Hungarian hospitality to its best, so please join me in celebrating their success as well. Of course, we wouldn't have been able to do this without the support of our sponsors and content partners. We thank them for all their support, for making sure that this agenda was fulfilling for all of us, and for making sure that we could actually offer many scholarships to educators and students from around the world. One more applause for our wonderful content partners, please. Our presenters and speakers, those people who have been on stage here and on the AFS Now stage, on all the concurrent sessions. One more round of applause for all of them. I also would like to thank a group of people that make me look good. They are the people that work tirelessly over months for very, very long nights to put together this event. The production team that is usually hidden, that you do not see them. I get to be the face of them, but you have heard some of their names. Some of them are up there in the booth making sure everything runs smoothly. Some of them are still running around making sure you have food. Give them a big round of applause. I am proud to be a team member with them. They are a truly amazing group of people. And finally, and of course, most importantly, a big, big thank you to amazing AFS volunteers. AFS volunteers, stand up. They are all the way in the back. I can see them. Thank you, guys. We have learned a lot from this event, and we hope you share that. And we hope to see you next year in Montreal. But to send us off, I do want to invite Ron back to the stage to give us one more taste.
For the next one, I would like to have a clap you like this. Okay, listen to it will be like ta 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 ta. Now with energy. Now more energy.